This episode may contain mature content. Listener discretion is advised. Content warnings can be found in the episode description.
Hey, we are the Lab Doctors. I'm Amanda.
I'm Dorothy.
And I'm Zhao Yong.
We are biomedical researchers who realized we still have a lot to learn about science.
So why not join us on this quest?
Welcome back to the Lab Doctors podcast. So this week is part 2 of intergenerational trauma. So Zhao Yong, take it away.
Yeah, so in the previous episode, we defined a lot of terms. So if you're just jumping in here, maybe consider at least listening to that part and then skipping to here if this is what you're more interested in.
Listen to everything.
But yes, please do listen to everything. So in the previous episode, we gave a brief introduction to intergenerational trauma and how it can pass from one generation to another through social or parental mechanisms. The main topic for this episode is about inheriting intergenerational trauma biologically. So to be more specific, whether we can inherit the biological changes as a result of prolonged exposure to psychological trauma.
I feel like that's a yes, right?
Yeah, given the empathy episode, maybe a bit.
So, fun part of the episode, definitions.
I love definitions.
I feel like it makes things clearer.
Yeah, we always Google words, even words that we know. So it's good. I just validating your definition section. Yeah.
Go on.
Excitement for that. Yes, okay, going on. So, in case you really don't want to listen to the previous episode, intergenerational trauma is defined as trauma that gets passed down from those who directly experience a traumatic incident to subsequent generations. But before we talk about intergenerational trauma transmission via biological means, we need to first talk about epigenetics.
Yes.
So I feel like we might have talked about this in the past. Maybe in the fasting episode, we alluded to what epigenetics is. Epigenetics basically is the study of changes in gene function that are heritable and that are not attributed to alterations of the DNA sequence. So it is important to note that this is distinctly different from mutations because mutations involve a direct alteration of the DNA sequence itself.
Yeah.
So how does one alter gene expression if the sequence is unaltered? So far, researchers have identified 3 mechanisms. Due to time concerns, I will only talk about 2 that are more relevant to today's episode.
I guess you can think about it as like you have ingredients. So say like you have chicken or like vegetable.
Yeah.
And then like if you actually change the vegetable like itself, then that's like changing the gene. But if you're like just changing the way you're cooking it, then that's like the epigenetics. Is that a good analogy?
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a good analogy. So one of the first mechanisms of epigenetic changes is DNA methylation. So DNA methylation works by adding a chemical group, particularly a methyl group, to DNA. So this methyl group is added to specific places on the DNA, and this addition blocks proteins from binding to DNA. So when these proteins cannot bind to DNA, they are unable to read the gene in that region, and hence that gene would not be expressed, and the functional output encoded in that gene would not be produced. So basically, if DNA is methylated, if a particular gene is methylated, it will not be expressed.
Yeah.
DNA methylation is reversible, so this means that the methyl group can also be removed, and basically methylation means turning off a gene, demethylation means turning on a gene. So the next one that I want to talk about is small non-coding RNA. So your DNA is used as instructions for making coding and non-coding RNA. So coding RNA is just basically the template to make proteins that would cause your functional output. Conversely, the function of non-coding RNA is to bind to coding RNA, and this causes coding RNA or your template to be broken down. And as such, the gene is not expressed, it doesn't continue to give you your functional output.
So basically, your DNA is not just genes. Your DNA has a lot of things. Genes are just a part of that.
Yeah, hopefully it's not too complicated.
Should we do an episode on...
Nah, that's like the central dogma of biology or genetics.
You can hound us on it if you want it. I mean, we'll try.
Or you can Google the central dogma of molecular biology.
Yeah,
I think.
YouTube.
Yeah. So there's also a third method, but we are not going to talk about it in this episode. It is called histone modification. You can Google about it, or I think the definitions will be linked in the show notes. So you can take a look if you're interested, but it's not important for this episode. So why is epigenetics important? Because it has been shown that prolonged exposure to trauma and stress was observed to be correlated with the downregulation of stress responses in our genes, while there is also an upregulation upregulation in stress response resulting from trauma. So basically we need all the code in our system to be able to handle the different stimulus that can happen in our life. So stress is one of them, but it's not usually expressed because you don't need a stress response to, like, let's say eating breakfast.
Yeah.
So when a person undergoes trauma, then this stress response might be upregulated in the sense that it might happen more often, or it might happen at completely unexpected moments due to certain triggers in our environment that we might be conscious or subconscious to. And because stress responses are linked to one's physical health, intergenerational trauma can manifest as medical issues including heart disease, stroke, and even early death.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
So actually it's a lot more insidious and dangerous than we think. Like, it's not just something that's like, oh yeah, mental only. So the question still remains, is intergenerational trauma heritable on a physiological level? And if you have actually followed my definition of epigenetics, you may already have the answer, because epigenetics is the study of changes in gene function that are heritable but not attributed to alterations in the DNA sequence. So based on this definition, it kind of feels like it's problem solved and epigenetics is definitely heritable. But if you believe me, then you have activated my trap card, because
Oh my god.
it is important to define what heritable here means.
Yeah.
So when biologists or researchers talk about heritability, they typically talk about it in two different ways. So one is somatic inheritance and another is germline inheritance.
Yeah.
So what is somatic inheritance? Any guesses? No guesses? Then let's talk about it. So basically, a somatic cell is any cell in the body that is not the germline cells. Basically,
sperm
the
or the
sperm
egg.
or egg. So somatic inheritance is actually talking about inheritance that occurs on a cellular level. So when a cell divides via mitosis, the changes in epigenome are inherited in somatic daughter cells.
Okay.
So does that happen in germline cells? Currently, it is not known. There are certain research going into like whether or not there are changes to the epigenome due to trauma or stress, and preliminary results kind of show that there is. But basically, we can't really fully confidently say that these changes are fully inherited just yet. It's still controversial.
Okay.
So going back to Prof. Isabel Mansui that we mentioned in the previous episode, she already used traumatized mice before, and she has shown that behavioral changes can be passed down and hence intergenerational trauma is propagated. So to prevent this, behavioral aspect affecting the results, she bred only traumatized male mice with untraumatized or naive female mice. So basically, because apparently males in nature don't really take care of their children.
For the moms, as in when the mice are born in the lab, they just like put it with the mom. They separate the males.
Yeah, exactly. Because so the male mice, because it's traumatized, it then breeds with a naive mice, and from there we can see whether or not epigenetic changes can be inherited that is not from behavior.
Yeah.
And so this type of breeding was continued for up to 6 generations, meaning male mice from a previous generation was used to breed with untraumatized naive female mice.
Yeah.
And what was observed was symptoms that were observed in the F1 generation, so the traumatized male mice was also observed in the F2 to F7 generations.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So they displayed more risk-taking behavior, like exploring exposed areas on a platform suspended off the ground. So typically mice don't really explore because they're scared of falling off, because they're so small. Falling off any height is potentially fatal. Yeah. But also when dropped in water, they gave up more often and stopped swimming compared to control mice. And that was an indicator of depressive-like behavior.
Yeah.
So like you give up because it's like, there's no point. So
Just let me die.
yeah, so the mice stopped swimming. So sad, and actually I find it really sad. I don't like the suffering of animals, but for the
I
greater...
hope they scooped it out before it died.
Oh, they will.
They will. Yeah, it's precious.
Yeah.
So all of these are indicators that epigenetic changes that alter behavior in traumatized parents can in fact be inherited by offspring in a biological manner as well. So not just through parenting styles, but also through biology. Like I'm inheriting trauma. So the actual mechanisms are again still being elucidated.
Yeah.
It's widely believed to be epigenetics. And this is through what I mentioned just now, DNA methylation, or more convincingly, small non-coding RNAs. So what about humans? Currently, it is still unclear if epigenetic changes are inherited in us, quote unquote, complex
beings, okay.
So why that is the case is because there's too much volatility in the human experience control for behavior. So like whether or not a behavior is a result of my trauma or is a result of me just having a very bad day, which can also be traumatic, but it's not intergenerational.
Yeah.
You can't really control for that. So that's why it's very hard to do these studies in humans.
Yeah. There's a lot of confounding factors.
Yeah, but what researchers are trying to do now is using the small non-coding RNA profiles that they got from mice and finding analogous small non-coding RNAs in the humans, in humans. They hope to be able to identify all these stress markers and check for whether or not these markers are inherited in subsequent generations. So that's what the research is moving towards. But do you all have anything to add at this point?
It actually blows my mind because so much of trauma, I think, is always from the environment and is in relation to how you see the world. Like I can't see the effect of like multiple generations on me because my only frame of reference is myself.
Yeah.
So I always think that trauma is very like environmental, like a nurture thing. And that my study that it can be passed down 6 generations, that's insane.
Yeah, as in, so what it means also by passing down, I realized I didn't really go into that. Basically stress responses.
Yeah.
So like maybe a stimulus that can trigger stress in a offspring of a traumatized individual can actually be more pronounced compared to a normal person.
So something as harmless as like something dropping, like making a loud sound. It might not affect most people, but it might affect me because like my grandparent was like traumatized by an explosion.
Maybe they have PTSD from something that went undiagnosed.
Isn't that
it's scary
insane?
To think about it in this way. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of like why people are so different, and you really see characteristics in babies already, like whether they cry, let's say from loud sound as well, or they're just more chill, like the baby just looks more chill, and maybe it's attributed to these kind of things being passed down. Like for me personally, I'm a very like anxious person. I always stress about like things not working out, experiments especially, and then I'll see other people and they're like more chill about it, and like for me, I also cry very easily, and I just wonder now if it's like inherited from my parents
Or ancestors, anyone.
anyone
lineage.
like is it because they also
Or like some traumatic event caused them to have these built-in responses. You know?
like why do I sometimes I'll be like, why do I cry at the smallest thing? And it's just compared to other people. And so maybe it's that.
But I feel like that's the heartwarming part about this whole thing. As in, if we are not talking about trauma, we're talking about the good things that we are also inheriting from our ancestors. So we are saying that we are actually inheriting a lot more
than
like
just
psychologically than just our like physical attributes, like how we look.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That changes things.
Yeah, that's a nice way to end.
Because before this, I was like, basically, I lose agency over everything in my life.
Oh, but that is the thing. We can still have agency. We can still choose to break this perpetual cycle by dealing with our own shit.
Which is why this study is important in a sense. Like I wouldn't have thought of it, but it is, because then you can address the issues and then fix it.
Yeah. As in, as much as a person, you can say like, oh yeah, I haven't been through much. I mean, honestly, personally, I've lived through a very privileged life.
Yeah.
And yet I am still so neurotic. Like sometimes I don't even understand why I'm so crazy.
Yeah, so maybe it's inherited.
Exactly. But again, it's not about like attributing blame. It's just about recognizing that, hey, actually maybe I do have certain traumas that I haven't addressed and dealing with it.
And it's not your fault, like that you're like that, maybe.
Exactly, maybe.
But then you might want to address it because...
Or you should address it because...
It depends. I don't know. Some people don't care.
I don't know, man. I feel like at this point I'm like, trauma can be so insidious. It can be like out of nowhere, you know?
Let's just think about the good stuff that we inherited from our...
Delusions. Okay. She's justifying it all the way. Okay, I feel like I want to go back into the research, and because again, it's not all really completely about doom and gloom, and why I feel taking action is important. So Mansui's group has provided actually preliminary studies to show that when traumatized mice are given an enriched environment, so this environment basically stimulates senses, engages the brain in play and exploration. Exactly. So basically larger houses with more wheels and mazes, and I don't know what this means in a human context.
Oh my god, you tell me larger houses, I'm like, give me a larger house. With wheels and cars.
The important part is that it is stimulating and engaging to the brain.
Yeah, okay.
Symptoms of trauma are actually not observed in offspring of traumatized mice.
Oh my god.
I guess the good thing is like, yeah, it can be tackled. Like
Exactly.
this problem can be solved.
Exactly. So this means that there is potential to heal one's trauma on a molecular level with positive life experiences and a good environment. And so
Yeah, unfortunately, I feel like you need a good environment, which is maybe like let's talk about like abusive families passing on this abusive trait. It's like probably because their family's not doing well also. I don't know if this is a stereotype.
yeah, but I feel like the point is, then are you capable, or sadly, are you privileged enough to be able to recognize your traumas and be able to deal with them? Like, I might not be a rich person, but if I am able to get by with my needs, like my physical needs,
Yep.
then I would argue that you also have the competence to be able to deal with like your psychological or mental issues as well. Yeah.
The way I see it is a bit education. Like, are you able
yes.
to access education? I see privilege in this context as like, are you able to access information and education? Not really like how many cars I have.
Oh, yeah.
And also whether your basic needs are met.
Yeah.
Yeah, so to reiterate, it is really just about recognizing your own insecurities, recognizing your own dysfunctions, because we all have them, and being able to admit to yourself that, hey, I have a problem, I should deal with it, and I should not be like a normal human being and just pass on my bad shit to all my children or everyone around me, because how healthy is that?
Yeah, which is why people say you need to think before you have a kid.
Oh,
Like you need to think of the responsibilities. It's not just having a cute little baby.
Yeah,
There's so
exactly.
much more.
exactly. And I think we all also kind of want to set off our children on the best foot. Who wants to sabotage their child, you know?
Yeah.
But by not doing that, by not dealing with our own traumas, I don't know if we can ever fully say that we are 100% in on raising a confident human being.
But at least think of the good traits you're passing on to your child. Do you have good enough traits you want to pass on to your child?
That's not the point already.
Do the benefits outweigh
That's not the point.
If it is more than 50%, you can have a child.
The point is deal with your traumas, people. Oh my god. And as usual, subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on Spotify. A like and a comment would really help us out.
You can also follow us on our social media, Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, and feel free to DM us any questions.
Alternatively, you can email us at thelabdoctors@gmail.com. We'll post all the article links in the episode description, so check them out if you're interested.
Bye.
Bye.